going or flashing in and out. We apologize for that, but I think in today's world of Zoom, we all understand the frustration sometimes that happens. So please bear with us. We'll be ready to start in about 2 minutes when everyone is able to join us. Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Doug Kress, and I am the Director of Health and Human Services for the City of Somerville. We want to thank you for joining us for the series of conversations that we're having with our community members regarding a supervised consumption site. We think that this is an important piece of our next steps of moving forward to really be groundbreaking here in Somerville and open the first supervised consumption site in the country. So we want to thank you for taking the time today to join us. As many of you know, this is the third in a series of 4 conference calls that we have been having. And in that, we have already hosted our first meeting, which was reviewing some of the work that we had conducted using a feasibility study. We were lucky enough to have 2 excellent resources within that, Alexis Collins, as well as Brandon Marshall from Brown University, who helped us put that together, along with some of our panelists today and other community members who helped do that research and bring that forward. As most people have heard in the past, this study is available online at the city's website at somervillema.gov/supervised consumption site. With that, we are thrilled to have you join us today in the second part of our number 2, which this conversation is really talking about the impact opioids have on family, whether that be our natural family or our chosen family and friends. So we want to thank you for joining us. We understand that this may be a difficult topic for some individuals and that this may be a little bit of a heavy conversation for some individuals who are telling their stories. We want to thank you for staying with us. We want to thank you for the time that you're spending and the energies that you're using to be with us tonight. We know that some of these stories may be difficult to hear. Some of these stories may be difficult to review, but we do thank you for being with us today. I also want to remind you that on the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button. If you do have any questions through this during this conversation, please feel free to put those into the chat or into the Q&A section. And we have Megan Ackerman, who will be monitoring that with us today. So thank you, Megan, for doing that. With that, I also want to thank our panelists today for taking the time to join us and be with us and take us through this conversation. I'd like to first start off by handing the mic over to Brian Sink. Brian is a harm reduction specialist and has been working in the field for a couple of years now. Brian, I believe you're going to be telling us a little bit about language. We're going to review that again, really talk a little bit about stigma, and you're going to introduce some of the work that you've been doing. So Brian.
Hi, everyone. As Doug said, my name is Brian Sink. I work for the Access Drug User Health Program based in Cambridge. We are a harm reduction organization that serves the needs of people who use drugs. I want to start off by, again, thanking you all so much for joining us tonight. We're certainly looking forward to a robust Q&A later in the hour, and we encourage all of you to feel free to share any concerns or questions that you might have kicking around following the presentations. We all feel it's incredibly important that everyone feel welcome in this space, and so all presenters tonight will be striving to use non-stigmatizing language. And a key component of non-stigmatizing language is trying to remember to use person-first language. So an example of that would be, instead of saying drug user, you'll hear a person who uses drugs. Along that same vein, we'd like to encourage everyone to refrain from using stigmatizing language like junkie, addict, substance abuse, or referring to people or syringes as clean or dirty. We believe strongly that just because a person uses drugs does not mean that they are inherently dirty. Instead of referring to someone as getting clean, instead we encourage you to simply say they've abstained or perhaps stopped using. And like instead of saying a dirty needle, try instead to say a used or discarded needle. So these are just some ideas to kind of kick around. We're not trying to be difficult or pushy. It's just incredibly important that everyone feel welcome and supported in this space. And so we ask that all language you choose be rooted, quite frankly, in compassion, empathy, respect, and dignity. So once again, we appreciate everyone being here and being open to learning and discussing the issue at hand. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Next, we're going to move into watching a video that was produced by one of the SIFMA Now individuals, Bill Freed, who has posted these on a variety of spaces. Bill has graciously allowed us to share this on the call today. So with that, our IT guru, Dan Moore, is going to be setting this up, and this will be approximately 5 minutes. So Dan.
A study released by ICER, an independent think tank, found safe injection sites would not only save lives, but also save cities millions of dollars by cutting down on service calls for overdoses.
We are moving forward to open one as soon as possible.
Mayor Joe Curtatone tells 25 Investigates he wants the first legal site to be in Somerville.
Safe consumption sites help us reduce harm, save lives, and provide referral services for those seeking assistance with their addiction.
Well, I grew up here in Somerville. Several people that I know have passed away in bathrooms to public restaurants. They've died in their own homes. They've died when their friends abandoned them in the middle of the street. And these are all places that are unsafe consumption sites. And there's needles in the park. I think if we had safe consumption sites, that would be something that could be addressed. Because it'd be a sterile environment dealt with by professionals. Our first responders are charged with running all over the city, going to people's houses, going to public bathrooms, going to alleyways, and finding people overdosing and saving them. That's a huge drain on resources for the city. They're already using the drug, so it's not like someone's going to see a safe consumption site and decide to take up heroin. I think we need to look at this as a public safety issue and treat the people as if they had a sickness, which is the case. And I don't think people walk by a hospital and say, they want to get into a bed in the hospital. They say that's where people go when they're sick. And I think that's the same thing with safe consumption sites.
I've been living in Somerville since 1953. Oh, I don't even want to think about the people I've known about who have lost their lives to overdoses. No, I think people who are inclined to do that are going to do it, whether it's legal or illegal, if they have to hide out, or if they can be in a safe place. I think it's better that they are somewhere where someone can watch over them if things go wrong.
I did lose my son, Jeff, to an overdose on February 5th, 2017. He had struggled with substance use disorder for nearly 10 years. I am a believer now in the harm reduction tool of supervised consumption sites. I was not at the time. I have to be honest with you. I thought every day is a new day. If they're alive, there's always a chance for recovery. And if the overdose prevention sites are manned with the appropriate personnel and staff, I believe that the compassion and the love is enough to keep these people coming back, bring up their self-esteem, develop relationships, and be open to wraparound services. These people are using not to get high, they're using not to get sick.
Is really my major mission, to get everybody to be aware of how dangerous opioids can be. My son got a prescription in 1995 of oxycodone, and within 20 days, 30 days of that prescription, the chase was on. He died in 2014. And very few people die in British Columbia now that go to safe houses. In fact, no one ever dies because there's always a nurse or there's a doctor or somebody on staff that's paying attention to what they're doing. I mean, you can see the picture behind me. And those are all parents who have lost a child that are holding those pictures, and those are the children that died. I mean, I would say that if those children, I bet 80% of them be still alive today if there was a safe house. I listened to The Current, which is a CBC radio show in Canada, and they found that 70% now of people who end up in safe houses eventually end up in recovery, because the nurses and the people who are there are able to educate them and able to work with them and help them get into recovery. And that's the ultimate goal, that they get into recovery and they get detoxed and on the road to sobriety. That's the goal.
I grew up in a house where my sister was a heroin addict. Many of my friends ended up on heroin. And so just through personal experience, I know what that lifestyle can be for some. And the folks that staff these places treat individuals, like they should, like every other human being. And oftentimes that's the only compassion they see on a regular basis. And so it can oftentimes soften them, and they're hard enough to remember, that the world isn't such a crappy place. And oftentimes it sparks them to want to seek help for if that's what they want to do for themselves, if they want to get treatment.
It's just a human response. I mean, we're all human. We don't wish harm on anybody. And to have a site like this is giving somebody a second chance.
Thank you, Bill, for that story that you were able to produce. I think one of the important things that we want to talk about tonight and hear from are some of the impacts that opioids have had on our family members. Brian, who's been working in our community for a while now, has some firsthand experience of working with families. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Brian again, who's just going to go into this, and then we're going to watch another video from some of our family members. Brian?
Thanks, Doug. So I'll talk a little bit more about my personal experience as an outreach worker in Somerville and the Cambridge area a little later. But I want to take a moment, as Doug said, to introduce the idea of impact on families, and specifically speaking, the impact of the opiate-related overdose epidemic on local families, as well as the impact that a potential supervised consumption site in Somerville would have for those who have loved ones that they're concerned for. I think it goes without saying that people who use drugs and people who love people who use drugs are doing everything they feasibly can, everything in their power to support themselves and their loved ones struggling with substance use disorder. I want to take a moment also to acknowledge that although I have not personally lost a child or a sibling to an overdose, that the work I do on outreach and overdose aftercare oftentimes puts me in contact with those family members of clients who I always try to provide support to, as well as by way of safety planning, resources for community connection, and more often than not, how to use Narcan on behalf of loved ones. It's always very difficult to put a parent in that, or spouse or roommate even in that specific position, but the prevailing notion is that they care, and they care enough to be willing to act in the moment should there be an emergency. I feel very strongly that a supervised consumption site in Somerville would provide a certain degree of peace of mind for families who often spend sleepless nights wondering if their family member is using alone, outside, someplace unsafe or unsanitary even, and that these family members could truly benefit from knowing that their loved ones have a place to go where they'll be watched over and taken care of by trained professionals. So in the next segment, we're going to watch a short film, but you're going to hear from a few Somerville residents who have been deeply impacted by this issue. And I really encourage you to listen to their stories and their perspectives. And don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Remember, this is about dignity, compassion, empathy, and above all else, it's about saving lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian, and thank you for opening the conversation. Just as a reminder, as you start to watch the videos, if you do have questions, you're certainly more than welcome to use the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen to ask those questions. With that, Dan, would you like to start the next video?
August 28th, we got a call from Boston Medical Center saying that my son was basically in a coma in the hospital and not expected to survive, actually. He had several back surgeries and a couple of strokes, and these were all caused by using and sharing dirty needles.
I've seen a lot of overdoses in my life, and I'm tired of seeing it, and I would love to see the change that we need to make.
You know somebody that has had a problem, or you know somebody that overdosed. You know somebody that's lost somebody.
They shared a needle. I don't know where they used it, but both of them ended up in the ICU. One portion of this hospitalization cost $220,000. That was not the whole time. That was the first bill that came. Another bill came that was $77,000. My son has been in jail many times, all related to his addiction.
You look at statistics, you look at studies. Jailing people never works. Incarceration does not work for any kind of drug problems. It does not help people. It does not further their lives. It basically throws them into a circle, a cyclical loop of, problem after problem after problem.
It's just, it has not been a solution for my son, that's for sure. And many of the people that he associates with, the same thing. They've all been in prison more than once. This story really breaks my heart. He smuggled Suboxone into jail during his last go-round there. And for that, he was subjected to 4 months in solitary confinement. To put somebody with mental illness in solitary confinement just seems to me to be extremely inhumane. And he, every time he's gone to jail, he has come out far worse than when he went in. Because it's not treatment, and it's not long-term treatment. It's long-term removal from society, which I guess has somewhat of an effect on a person, but
you can't just force people for treatment unless they're ready for it. And that's one of the things with harm reduction. Harm reduction meets people where they're at. A safe consumption site gives you a place where you can walk in, and it can give you the option to go into rehab if you so choose, or meet a professional that could talk to you about your intake or what your goals for are. And if you're not ready for that, at the bare minimum, it gives you a place where you can walk in there and you can know that what you're using, or the equipment that you're using, is clean.
Fentanyl is being placed into a lot of the drugs going around lately, so it'll be, they'll be able to get their drugs tested there.
I know the questions that come up around, for example, are we enabling people? Are we making it too easy for them to do this? And I have conflicts about how much I agree with it, but the whole idea of enabling, I don't think comes into play in this way, because he and the people who he's closest to, who also have the same struggle with addiction, we're not enabling them because they've tried to quit. And for whatever reasons, mental health issues, the pull of this kind of addiction, which is huge, I hear it's worse than anything. But to have an actually medical supervised place, or some kind of medical professional supervising this, seems to me to make sense. And I know I might be sounding like non-emotional, and I'm speaking about my son, but we've been going through this for almost 30 years, continuously. He tries, he goes to rehab, he stays off of these drugs for a certain amount of time, and then we're right back on it again. So it's not a question of enabling him, it's a question of making what he is going to do anyway more safe. We don't know when the next dose would be fatal. And because of that, I've mostly come to the conclusion that I suppose this is one way to go. I just wanted to come on and say all of this for me as his mother. As you can imagine, it's been an adventure that's been incredibly incredibly difficult. But also for him, he really wants this to be said and wants me to say it for him. So I am. Thank you for listening.
It really doesn't make any sense why all these other countries can have this perfectly sane, logical, and humane way to help people access treatment and live.
You know, if he had had a place that was safe and medically supervised, you know, if he had had a place that was safe and medically supervised.
So a friend of mine texted me during that video and just said, this is very moving. So I want to thank those who participated in that video. And we're lucky enough to have Bonnie with us tonight to share a little bit of her story, a little bit more about where she's at currently and how things are moving. Bonnie, thank you for taking the time today. We really appreciate it. I just want you to note that you're still on mute. So if you want to click your unmute button, you'll be able to join us. Thank you.
Okay. How is that? Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Thank you. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity actually to come on and share. And again, I did consult with my son and asked him what he thought about this. And he thought that it was a beautiful idea. In fact, you know, somebody said earlier something about self-esteem, and I must say that my son's self-esteem is so low that he calls himself some of the words that we would not say is humane language to say for a person struggling with this issue. And it breaks my heart when I hear him talk like that. But for him to think that there would be enough care and enough love to have a place to go where people would not be thinking of him that way, but rather would be treating him as a human being who deserves respect, would make all the difference in the world to him. And I asked him if he would use it, and he said he would. And he said so would his friends, he believes. So I agreed to do this, to tell his story. I'll tell you a little bit about my story, and my family's story is that we have many, many people in our family, in extended family, who have been victims of this addiction and have died. I don't know why my son is still alive. Truly, I don't. And I don't think he does either. We question it, you know, because, as I said, it's been going on for 30 years. He was just a teenager when he first became addicted to this. And he has been in, I've just lost count of the rehabs and the prison sentences and the hospitals, the times he's been in ICU. This was not the first time that he's been in ICU. But this time was by far the worst. He now walks with a cane. He came so close to death that, you know, my family and I met and discussed whether or not we would take him off life support and do a do not resuscitate. And one of his brothers held out that he could not, in all conscience, do that. He didn't want us to do that. And I agreed that, you know, even though I'm the next of kin, that if any of my children, his siblings, said that they wouldn't do it, then I would not do it. And so we didn't. And he did recover. Well, he recovered from that incident, but he was in the hospital from August until February. And as I said in the video, not to be cold, but for those who could not see this in a humane light as the humane thing to do, then maybe we should think about it in the light of the cost to society as in addition to the cost to the individual, because the amount of money that has gone into trying to help my son is just, it boggles the mind. And I believe now that a lot of that could be alleviated by having a safe consumption site where he gets to be around people who care about him and who care that the needle he's using is clean, and that watch to see if anything's going to happen. You know, he's had many friends die, right, even when he was with them. So the level of trauma that he experiences at this point is, it's just, I'm speechless because I see him now about once a month because he's really not able to have a relationship at this point in any real sort of way because of brain damage now and the strokes and so on. So I'm resolved, to what might come next. But for him and for others who are suffering like he is, I just think that this is something we can offer in a fight that none of us have been able to find the answer to yet. If it were easy, we would have found a way to make this stop, but it's not stopping for him and many others like him. And so the next best thing, I think, is to do something that reduces the harm. I guess that's all. If there's more, certainly I'd be happy to answer any questions. No question is off the books in my mind. You're free to ask whatever you want, and I will answer as honestly as I can. As I said, we've been through this for years and years and years, so nothing shocks me. Nothing feels above my ability to talk about. So, and thank you for listening. I'm very grateful to be able to have the chance to share. So thank you.
Thank you, Bonnie, for sharing your story and sharing some of the stories of your son as well. I really appreciate that. I know, I get to see you quite frequently, so I'm honored to be able to do that. And I just want to say thank you. You mean a lot to a lot of people, and this is something that's very helpful for a lot of people to hear. And thank you for being open to questions. I think that's an important piece as well. And we may have some of those later on in the Q&A. And with that, I'm just going to do two things before we move on to our next speaker. The Q&A button is available on the bottom if you want to post a question. As Bonnie said, she's open to answering questions. Feel free to ask those questions, even some of those hard questions. And I think that's an important thing that we have in front of us as well. With that, I'm going to turn to Mark. Mark, I know that you've been a Somerville resident all of your life. I think it's been all of your life. And you were here several years ago when our community was really starting to see the impact of opioids. And I know you have a story you want to share as well. So thank you for being here. And I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Thank you for having me, Doug. Thanks. Appreciate it. Bonnie, thank you as well. Very powerful. I think a lot of what I have to say is just going to be echoing what Bonnie said. As Doug said, my name is Mark. I grew up in Somerville. I grew up at the very start of what some people call the opiate era. The very beginnings. I was 16 years old. The first time I knew someone that died of an opioid overdose. I'm 35 now, and not a year has passed since I was 16 that someone I know hasn't died of an overdose. I remember stopping by a friend's house to visit, and his sisters, when I knocked on the door, went to get him for me, and they found that he was overdosing in his bedroom. And, if I hadn't happened to come by, he probably would have died. Luckily that day, first responders were able to get there. This was before Narcan was readily available to the public. So I didn't know what to do. So he was saved that day. But unfortunately, years later, he died of a fatal overdose in a public restroom in Davis Square. I also knew someone that died in front of the McDonald's, in the doorway of McDonald's in Davis Square. I know someone who died, who was left to overdose in a snowbank. After losing countless peers, I was able to find some healing and doing some similar stuff to what Brian does, is doing street outreach. This is where I kind of became familiar with the concept of harm reduction. When you first hear about harm reduction, and even the concept of safe injection sites, is understandably to some seems counterintuitive at first glance. But after building relationships with some of the most vulnerable populations in our community for the better part of 8 years, I really learned to embrace the philosophy of harm reduction. And it's just a very simple concept of meeting people where they're at. We've wasted decades telling people to just say no. And that's not the worst message in the world, but what does it mean to someone who already said yes, who's already well on their path? They said yes years ago. So I think we need to shift the conversation and really just rethink the way we're approaching this problem with evidence-based practices. We seem to embrace this attitude of the only thing we hate more than the status quo is change. We just seem to be locked in that we don't like the way things are, but as we try to conceptualize new solutions, people kind of have knee-jerk responses to that. As someone who's been on the front line of this epidemic from my teens, both personally and professionally, I can say that the status quo has left us with really nothing but a body count. We've lost a whole generation, my generation specifically. If we can prevent more deaths and save lives, reduce disease, provide a safe space that fosters the road to help, I think that's definitely worth trying. That being said, I do understand, as I was saying, harm reduction for those for the uninitiated, if you've not, been kind of schooled on it, it sounds like this radical, crazy idea. I promise you, it's really not. I know parents, and I heard several parents in the videos that you guys showed us who, are hesitant at the idea. I know I have friends who have passed whose parents don't like the idea. You hear these things of, aren't we making it too easy? Are we enabling, as Bonnie said? Are we fostering criminal activity? But my question is, after all of like the finger waving and shaming, incarceration, condemnation, has any of that stopped the spread of this epidemic that is now in every community in our country? We have to ask ourselves, are we more okay with people dying in the streets as long as we can maintain our stance of disapproval? Or do we set aside our personal judgments and recognize this as the public health crisis that it really is and meet people where they're at and save lives? The problem is here. It's at our doorstep. It's undeniable. So are we more okay with the problem existing under bridges and in public parks and bathrooms rather than a public health building? And like Bonnie said, and a lot of people say, it's like, I think there's this fallacy that, if we don't provide the facility, if we don't provide the tools, or, that, it's going to stop the behavior. And that's just not the case. The behavior just becomes more risky. It becomes more dangerous. So we kind of have to accept that it's out there, it's happening, it's everywhere. That conversation has passed. Now we have to figure out how do we mitigate the damage for those who are, trying to overcome, and the family, the community, for every single resident in the community, it affects you, whether, you're the parent of a toddler who finds a discarded needle, or, you're like myself who's lost a lot of friends, or you're a parent, or you're someone that's actively using. It's time to, really reimagine how we're approaching this crisis. So that's all I have to say about that. Appreciate the time.
Great. Thank you, Mark. And thanks for taking the time. And I think you did a really nice job of explaining what harm reduction is during your comments in there about that and how we're looking at that and why we need to think differently, because many of the things that people think they've tried in the past are not working. So we have to rethink how we're doing this and open our eyes up to solutions that we know are evidence-based and are proven to be successful, to one, either help people think about not using or changing some of their behavior to reduce the amount that they're using, but also making it a safe place for them to make choices, not just about people who use, but also their other health needs, and making sure that those are met as well, I think are a critical part of this as part of harm reduction. And as Bonnie alluded to, the whole idea about the other medical expenses that are there and the other services we're able to connect individuals with within a supervised consumption site, I think are critical parts of that. So that's about the individual. I want to go back to Brian and maybe if you could give us a little bit more about some of the work you're doing about aftercare and working with families and the work that you're doing in that area that really help people understand and will also connect people to understand how families can connect into supervised consumption sites as well.
Sure. I've had the privilege of working alongside Mark McLaughlin in doing a lot of overdose aftercare and outreach. And just to sort of unpack a little bit about what that looks like. So I'm the outreach coordinator for the Access Drug User Health Program. 2 days a week, I connect with local partners in both law enforcement, but also fire department. And we receive reports either from EMS reports, ambulance logs, police reports, and if it includes any sort of contact information, then we do our best to try to make contact with the survivor of an overdose, and not in a way to pressure them into detox or treatment, but in a way to sort of check in, see how they're doing. If they are not aware of existing resources, at least providing that. Maybe doing a little safety planning with them, seeing if they or anyone that they are connected with back at home would like to have Narcan and be trained on how to use it should another event occur. And to just really meet that individual, whether it's at the hospital or at their home or even by the phone, to let them know that there are folks that are concerned and are here to help, and will treat them with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And it doesn't always end with, a connection. I mean, sometimes folks are not really interested in that moment, but you know what, they keep our card, they keep our literature, and then oftentimes a month or so will go by and they show up. And I consider that a big success. I think at the end of the day, we need to keep an open mind, keep an open heart, and recognize that the way we have been doing things is not working. The war on drugs has gone on for decades now and is not saved lives. And we have a blueprint for what does work in other countries, Canada, Holland, Australia, Germany, you name it. And, look at the facts, look at the evidence, and then square that with the recommendations that the report provided for Somerville. And I think that it would be a wonderful addition to the folks. And I just want to touch base on something that Mark said that I thought was really integral, and that nobody would come to these sites having not used before. No one's going to walk in the doors of a supervised consumption site and say, hey, I'm going to try heroin today. This is a place that a person could go to and be connected to care. I think up to the tune of 70% of people who access these sites, eventually go into treatment. Anyone who arrives at the sites are 30% more likely to try detox, and it may take several times. But as Lynn said in the video, it was very impactful for me that take every day as it comes, and a person can't get help if they're not alive. So what we do is we try to acknowledge that drug use is going to happen. People are going to make the decisions that they make, but how can we keep them alive, keep them using safely, make sure they have new equipment each time, and they won't use alone and be fatal. And so what do we know, right? We know that the opiate epidemic and overdose epidemic has just increased. For a while, like in 2019 or so, it looked like it was beginning to plateau. But as many of you are aware, the report came out for 2020 and it spiked across the board nationwide as well as in Massachusetts. I think we lost in 2020 over 2,100 individuals just in Massachusetts alone. So let's try something different. Let's try something that's proven to work. Last thing I want to say is that, supervised consumption sites are everywhere around us, right? Whether it's squares and parks or outside existing services. The difference is that we need to have trained professionals that are there to watch over folks and be able to react in the moment. A park square will have lots of foot traffic and people watching over one another, but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody's going to be able to recognize the signs of an overdose or have Narcan on their person. What it does look like in practicality is someone is there to call 911 when something looks like someone's in distress. So how can we sort of collapse this idea into a place that people would feel comfortable going to and stay alive and eventually get the care that they need?
Great. Thank you, Brian. We appreciate all those words and the work that you're doing. We also have TJ Thompson with us. Some of you may remember TJ was one of our panelists back last week when we were talking about individuals who also has some harm reduction backgrounds and working on some of that. I'm not sure, TJ, if you have access to opening up your mic, but if you wanted to add anything else regarding some of the harm reduction that we've been talking about, we certainly would welcome that today as well. I'll give him a second to see if he can unplug. And if, there we go. Thanks, TJ.
Amazing. I'm watching that.
Okay, we are having, it looks like we're having a little bit of technical difficulties with some of that. Megan, I know that we've gotten a few questions in our questions and answers area. And again, we encourage people to use those. Do you have one for our panelists today?
Yeah, we actually got a couple of questions that touched on this. So I know Brian talked a little bit about services that are available right now for folks who overdose. But people were wondering, if there would be those kinds of wraparound services available at a supervised consumption site. And someone was also wondering if there would be services for families or loved ones of people who use drugs.
Brian?
Sure, I'll take that one. So I think it's also important to also reiterate that the report that we're working with is based on recommendations, and those recommendations are based on what has been proven to work in the countries where they have implemented and opened up supervised consumption sites. And so, regarding wraparound services that many of those sites have include things like, health and social services, counseling, safety planning, case management, linkage to care, whether it's behavioral health or to initiating a PCP, medication-assisted treatment like Suboxone, buprenorphine, methadone, basic medical services, and even food provision. So I often hear during when folks are on the fence about supervised consumption site, they think that we're shooting for third base without going to first and second, and it's like, well, the supervised consumption site will include wraparound services. So it's kind of a one-stop shop for all those needs that are so difficult to come by when you are a member of an incredibly marginalized, deeply stigmatized population. Was there a second part to that question? If so, I'm sorry.
Yeah, someone was also asking about what resources there might be for families and loved ones of people who use drugs.
Perhaps I think that would be a wonderful addition to the services. I can't speak directly to what a Somerville site would look like in the end game, but I do think that families and loved ones should feel empowered to be able to go to these places to acquire Narcan, to acquire resources for their own support, to what they can do best to support their loved ones. Yeah, absolutely should include that for sure.
Great, thanks, Brian. Let me just add a little bit more into that, because I think one thing to keep in mind for all of our listeners and people who are working on these projects, we're still developing what other services are going to be in there. I think this is our phase that we're moving into. As we move forward, we've done our feasibility study. And if people do want to learn a little bit more about that, again, I encourage you to go into the city's website, somervillema.gov/SES. You'll be able to find additional information and some additional resources, some additional linkage to some evidence-based materials that are in there to learn a little bit more about that. But one of the things that we want to make sure is critical is that we want to make sure people understand that these are also bringing in wraparound services for individuals. So that could mean additional working with some of our healthcare providers to have a doc there that may be able to look at wound and wound care. It might be about HIV and STI testing and a variety of other areas, because we know that all these things sometimes can be connected, and making sure we look at the holistic approach in individuals so that we're able to really do some services, and it's the wraparound services for an individual. And for those people who are supporting them as well, we know that there needs to be some additional connections. Now, we also understand that all those services may not be provided right there at the site, because it's just not, we're not capable of doing that in one particular location. But there will be referrals and easy access for some of those referrals, whether that could be around housing, it could be around filling out paperwork, it may be around accessing internets, and a variety of other things. So keep in mind that, we're not just talking about a location where people are going in to use and that's it, they're going to turn around and walk away. We're always connecting services into that to really move forward, to be able to really, as Bonnie talked about, show that there's somebody out there who's checking in with them and caring about individuals, that we have somebody in our lives that's going to be checking in on us. If somebody is using on a daily basis and they don't show up for a day and then they show up the following day, it's asking, so you weren't in yesterday, everything okay? What's there? It's somebody else being able to just touch base with, knowing that your self-worth is there as well, I think is an important piece of this. And those are some of the stories that I've heard from some of my family members who have been using and are out there and given their experiences as well. Megan, do we have another question in the queue?
Yeah, so we got a couple of comments that are kind of in the same vein, so I was going to sort of combine and summarize them. And I know this is something that also several of our panelists have touched on, but if folks have more to add, I think this would be great. People are concerned that a supervised consumption site isn't a quote unquote solution for the issue of substance use. And, would there be better ways, whether it's other services, or increasing what's already available, might that be a better way to go? And kind of to the question of enabling that Bonnie talked a little bit about, is this a way to just enable folks who use drugs?
Thank you. I think I'm going to let a couple of people also chime in on this question, because I do think this is an important one. Let's start with Mark and kind of your comments on that.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. It's a very common question. As I said in my little, rant, I completely understand that, the first response is kind of like, this seems counterintuitive. Like, aren't we trying to get people to stop doing drugs? Why are we giving them a space to do drugs? Or I understand that. I think it comes down to the principles of harm reduction. And, the words you guys, you hear repeating is, the wraparound services. We need a holistic approach. There's no silver bullet. And sometimes even people in the field of human services get into debates around philosophy, around which is the best approach. And my personal feeling is all of it, all the time. Let's do everything. But I think if we're talking about entry level services, meeting people where they're at, that first introduction. I know I did street outreach for years in Boston. I worked down Methadone Mile. If I'm meeting someone for the first time in my first interaction, and I came into it with the same perspective, it was like, my job's to help people get sober. I'm out here trying to get you clean and all that stuff. And that's such a turnoff if to an individual who's, first of all, heard it all before, is, years into their addiction. So we start off at the base level of, all right, how can we keep you safe? How can we keep you alive? How can we, that's that conversation that you start off having. As you build that trust, and as Brian was saying, and it can take a long time. You build that rapport and trust in the facility and the people that are there and the people that are caring for you. And then you have that access to further services. And I'll say one more thing. Again, it's I wouldn't say it's the solution per se, right? I don't think this is not going to solve the epidemic, but the reality is we are in an epidemic and we need to mitigate the epidemic. We need to keep people alive so they can get better. And are we more okay with saying, are we more morally justified to say, well, I disapprove of substance use, so shame on you, and I'm more okay with you dying under a bridge as long as you know I disapprove with your behavior? Or to say, well, you know what, I might not agree with what you're doing, but I want you to have the opportunity to get well. And that's, I think, kind of for me, how I wrap my head around it, because I can't understand the perspective, but the question back is it better for us to say, well, we disapprove? Are we telling them it's okay to use drugs? And I don't know, is it better to condemn people for using drugs and have them die in the streets, or to say, you know what, we accept that you're using drugs and we're going to try to help you stay alive? I don't know if that's my perspective.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks for coming forward to say that. TJ, are you able to go on mic now? I know you were having some technical difficulties earlier.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Hi, Doug.
Hello.
I want to say first off, Mark, that was an excellent response. And I really would like to say that covers the human response so incredibly eloquently. That was a great thing to listen to. So I want to cover the other side of that. When you ask a question like that, and I never know what answer is the most appropriate answer to give. When I hear that, so I think about it, and I look at the person I'm talking to, and it usually helps me to know what their background is coming in and asking a question like that. So I would this is actually a two-part response. It's everything that Mark just said. And then I would add to that, you have the human side, just the flat out talking to people about how this actually works with humans. And then it's just numbers and data. Every single set of numbers and data about SCS come around to doing more, excuse me, I'm sorry. Every single set of numbers and data comes around to helping and doing less harm. And that's harm reduction. But this is something that has been proven over and over and over again. This is not an answer. This is not a new thing that's happening in the United States, so much as this is something new that we are doing in the United States in a legal fashion. This is something that has been happening in 120 SCSs in countries all over the world for 30 years. It's been extensively studied, has been extensively reported on. So when it comes down to it, you hear the human side about how that helps people get into a better part of their life, but you also just read the numbers over and over and over again. There's no bad numbers. Everything points to a better situation for everybody involved, the communities, the people, the families. Everyone involved in an SCS ends up in a better place somehow, because what the end result is zero deaths. 0 deaths, 30 years. Please remember that.
Thank you, TJ. I know that we are coming close to the end of our session, but we do have additional questions. And I would want to remind people that we do kind of filter through some of the questions just to consolidate and make sure that that we are using correct languages. But we are asking all the questions that are up in the queue that we are getting from the individuals. So we do want to thank you for asking those questions. And those that we are not able to get to, we will definitely post those on the website. We do hope to have additional meetings like this, and we're hoping someday we're going to be able to do these in person, but for safety reasons, we're still doing them virtual. We also know that it's sometimes easier for some people to attend meetings like this in a virtual way rather than just in person. But again, we will be having additional meetings in our community out into the out in the community. And I do want to thank that we've had just over 40 individuals participating on this site as well. And I remind you that we are also streaming this live on YouTube as well, and it will be posted as well. Megan, do we have a couple more questions to go through before we end tonight?
Yeah, I was going to see if we could take two more. One is, again, sort of a combination of an issue a few people have raised just on the scarcity of existing services now. So, you know, if you got someone into a supervised consumption site and if they were interested in mental health services or services to help with their substance use issues, are those going to be available for them? And, you know, do we need to sort of beef those up as well?
Great, thank you. I can start that question, and Brian, if you want to add anything, or Bonnie, if you want to add anything into this as well, we can certainly do that. Yes, again, we want to remind everybody the whole idea behind these are also to have wraparound services for individuals, whether those are around additional mental health services, physical health services, it may be around housing, making sure that the supports are there to help people get access to housing, get access to mental health services, get access to healthcare, treatments, other treatment that they may need. So we do really look at this as doing a holistic approach and a whole wraparound approach within a supervised consumption site. That is the concept behind this. Brian?
Sure, I feel the same way. I feel like there is a lot of benefit to consolidating resources. I think the status quo is that you have several different agencies throughout the region who are doing a lot of the same work and doing it well, but sometimes it's difficult to do the work and also coordinate with like-minded partners. And so I think having a hub, a supervised consumption site that can provide referrals and you know, perhaps even based on where the person specifically lives, like what's within walking distance or what program is best suited for their needs. There's a lot of benefit to that. I want to just harken back just real briefly about the, Tony brought up an interesting question earlier, and I want to thank them for offering it. It's not a solution per se, but it is a means to get there. And you know, this is an attempt to manage a situation that is ongoing. And you know, to the question of like enabling, I feel like the only thing that a supervised consumption site is going to enable, it's going to enable people to stay alive. And be able to access the kind of the level of care that they should have access to. So what are the three things that we know, right? The three things that we hear questions about, and oftentimes the folks who are very overtly opposed to supervised consumption sites are oftentimes the same individuals who express a lot of concern about discarded needles in the community or crime or violence or increased drug use. So let's look at the data, and the evidence runs counter to that, right? The evidence is that a supervised consumption site does not increase drug use in the area. It does not bring additional people who use drugs to the area. It's accessed by folks within a 20-minute walk, within a 2-mile walk or so. Supervised consumption sites do not increase the amount of discarded needles on the ground. In fact, they reduce them. There's proper ways to dispose of them inside, so folks aren't having to use out in public squares or bathrooms or restaurants. And so, quite frankly, it does reduce them. And lastly, it does not increase crime or violence in the area at all. This is evidence that we have garnered from other sites, other countries, other cities that have put this in place. And I think the evidence speaks for itself.
Great, thank you. We have time for one more question. Megan, do we have one more question that you'd like to bring out?
Yeah, and I'm going to combine two related questions. So it's going to be a three-parter. So 3 questions in one. So what is the process necessary to get a site open? Have we encountered opposition? And what is the legal status of providing a supervised consumption site, including providing sterile needles? And would that be an issue?
So great questions. I'm going to try maybe do some of them in reverse, and I will ask others to step in as well. As far as providing needles and sterile needles, we are part of a program, and that actually is one of the programs that we do have available for our individuals, which is a needle exchange program. And those are providing clean needles. That is actually funded through the state. And we are contractors with Fenway Health, and they work closely with some of the homeless coalition, also go out and do a variety of outreach. Currently in Somerville, we do not have a brick and mortar location for that. It is all done through outreach and through van services where we have people going around in the city. So we have that available. As far as the legalities of supervised consumption sites, as most people know, there is not one that is legally opened in the United States. Past administrations have challenged those. I think many of us may have seen some of that we saw efforts being done just outside of Philadelphia. That has not opened as of yet. They ran into a variety of legal situations. We have a new administration now, and that may change. And we are really trying to learn a little bit more about that and truly trying to understand some of that. I think we also need to be aware that locally in our own state house, there are new legislation, or there's the legislators who are really holding hearings on this, and we'll be looking at this at the end of next month to look at doing possibly piloting a supervised consumption site here in the Commonwealth. In that, we really want to look at that and be ready for that and have our shovel-ready program and projects ready to go if that were to happen. That would ease much of the challenges that we might face because, to be honest, this is a new thing. We will be the first. We don't know what legal challenges we may run into until we actually move it forward in those directions. So we'll work on it that way. And then what steps are we taking? This is one of those steps that we're taking, is really getting information out. These are listening and learning opportunities for people in our community to learn a little bit about supervised consumption sites. We did some feasibility study that's available on our website. We talked with a variety of individuals impacted. Now we're talking with family members. And next we'll be talking a little bit more about community and impacts of that and how that will float on that. At the same time, we're also putting together a proposal to try and find a vendor who will help us kind of put those pieces together about identifying a location. Where would one of these be ideally located? What kind of a building would it be? What kind of support services and co-location of services could we put into a location like this? And then finally, opening up a site and run by an individual. We haven't decided who that would be, where that would be. That is still part of the process that we'll be going through. We will continue to move this forward as we are able, and really continue to try and get input from the community so that we can move this forward. I know some people want to get it open tomorrow. That would be ideal. I understand that. I appreciate that, and I agree with that. But we also know that this will take some education to do. This is also, we will also take time to really understand where we need to go next and how we're going to engage the community so that it is successful. We also want to make sure that it's a place that people will utilize. We can't just build it without individuals who may use the site. That is a critical part of that as well. So we'll continue to gain that information from there. I hope that answered your question for you. I do realize that we are now about 4 minutes over our 7 o'clock closing time, but we do want to thank everybody. But if everybody's willing to, I think we have 1 or 2 more questions that we'd be able to take if the panel's willing to stay on. Megan?
So we got a couple of comments. One, someone is sharing the link to a movie called Winds of Trauma. So that may be something people may want to check out if they're interested in learning more. And I believe that's it.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. I'm glad we were able to get through some of most of the questions that were in the chat or the Q&A area. If you have additional questions, you're more than welcome to go into our city's website, call 311, or you can certainly send them to me at dcrest@somervillema.gov. I am the Director of Health and Human Services, and we will certainly get those responses back to you as soon as we are able. Finally, I just want to say thank you again to everybody who joined us tonight. I really appreciate the stories. Bonnie, it's always great to see you. And I was glad to see Kinau. Now I'm going to get his name wrong. I saw him on your lap earlier, your new little puppy. So it's great to see him as well. So thank you for being with us. Mark, thank you for sharing your stories. We appreciate that. And we know that we'll see you around the community as well. And TJ, Brian, thank you for your expertise. We really do appreciate that. And finally, I want to say thank you to Megan for helping me facilitate tonight. It's great to have you as a partner on these meetings. And then, of course, Dan is our IT expert behind the scene. But most of all, I want to thank all of you at home who took the time to spend an hour with us to learn. And I really appreciate the energy and the time that you have. And we look forward to seeing you in our upcoming meetings. Our next community forum and our town hall meeting will be next week on the 27th. You can find the link again, same place you found this, at our town hall meetings. So with that,
Sorry,
thank
I have
you.
one
Megan.
more correction. Someone corrected me. It is Wisdom of Trauma, if people are looking for that movie, not Winds of Trauma.
Great. Thank you.
Misread that.
Great. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time. Thank you, Megan. And have a safe